Mark Armstrong. Mark Armstrong, I'm sorry. Armstrong, yes.
You must have been thinking of the singer, Susan.
Got it. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Mm. 2 minutes. Yay. Just so you all know, we had more than 150 people look in on our recordings. So people are interested on the last forums we had.
How many was that?
More than 150. So that's good. We have 1 more minute.
Interesting.
It's 6 o'clock, so I think we'll start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight to meet the Republican candidates for Wyoming Secretary of State. This is an excellent opportunity to gain insight into their thinking. I'm Susan Dong, a member of the Wyoming League of Women Voters. Tonight's forum is sponsored by the Wyoming League of Women Voters, Teton County Library, Jackson Hole News and Guide, KHOL, Jackson Hole Community Radio, Buckrail, and WyoFile. We're going to begin the evening with a fun icebreaker question to draw out the personalities and differences in the candidates who are here tonight. Dan Dockstetter, Tara Nethercott, Mark Armstrong, and Chuck Gray. Following their icebreaker questions, our media panel will ask our get down to business questions. Each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to answer the question on a rotating basis, so everyone has a chance to go first. Tonight's media panel consists of Kyle Mackey from KHOL, Jackson Hole Community Radio, and Billy Arnold from Jackson Hole News and Guide. Reed Dornan, League of Women Voters member, is our timekeeper. She will indicate when time is running out. So candidates, make sure your computer is set to gallery view so you can see Reed and her signs. Each candidate also has a red card or a red item to use once at any time, worth up to 1.5 minutes. This red card can be used as the candidate sees fit, but doesn't have to be used. At the end of the media questioning phase, candidates will have 1.5 minutes to summarize and present closing remarks. I know that tonight will be interesting. So let's start with Billy's icebreaker question to Mark Armstrong.
I'm Billy from the Jackson Hole News and Guide, and our icebreaker question tonight is: what person, dead or alive, would you most want to have dinner with? Why? And I'll add on to there, what would you eat?
My Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and bread and fish. You want to know why? or just do you want to know?
That'd be great. Yeah, the why would be great.
Well, first of all, he's God. He can tell me so much about the universe and about who and why and how, and it would be an extremely interesting conversation. Also, the world's a pretty broken place these days because we have pushed God out of the public square. And in so doing, we have not, followed his teachings. So I'd like to know more about where he'd want us to go, how we could proceed forward and bring our country back into God's good graces.
Thank you. Dan, you're next.
I'd have dinner with my deceased father, who made wonderful cheeseburgers and milkshakes. And I'd sit down and say, Dad, what do you think about me running for Secretary of State? And he'd said, I think you can do this, son. I think you get this done. That's my answer.
Terrific. Chuck?
Well, I'd really like to get dinner with Thomas Jefferson because I admire his service to our country a great deal. And he got involved at a young age and he served admirably, and would really like to get his feedback on the political climate here in the year 2022, how we can get things done to move our country in a positive direction, and also fiscally, how things have gotten so out of control and really out of line with where the founders were at. So I'd want to quiz him a little on that, and a little what he thought about the different founders. And being in the legislature, there's always personalities involved. And I'd love to get to know Jefferson's feelings on everyone, what makes them tick, and what their negatives are too, because none of us are perfect. And so I'd really like to grab dinner with Jefferson.
Thank you. And Tara?
What a fun question and a true icebreaker to help hear and learn more about us. Of course, there are so many people I would want to have dinner with and who have passed away. But as it relates to this race and this campaign, and someone who is special to me and I speak about often is Esther Hobart Morris. And she, of course, is the mother of women's suffrage, the right to women to vote and hold office in our great state, and the first in the world, right? What a pioneer who exhibited true grit and tenacity out here in the West, making Wyoming, that historical place on the global stage. It was such a proud moment for us to learn from her what it was like to be the first woman justice of the peace and to lead the way on that suffragist movement. I think would just be a remarkable thing. I'd probably want to ask her and share with her some food from our modern day, as opposed to trying to partake of some of those food from 1869, and rather see if she'd like a nice glass of wine and some pizza, or maybe a hamburger and milkshakes would be true as well. So I'd like to share with her and take a load off of her busy day, and spend a wonderful evening learning about her strengths.
Thank you. Now on to our media panel's questions. This question is from Kyle to Dan.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kyle from Jackson Hole Community Radio. Our first question tonight, with 4 Republicans, including 3 sitting Wyoming lawmakers competing in this primary, what personal and professional qualifications would you bring to this role that distinguish you from your opponents? I'm not sure if Dan heard, but Dan, I believe you're up first for this one.
Okay.
You're on mute.
Yeah, and Susan will give the order.
Thank you. First of all, I'm currently serving as president of the Wyoming Senate. Prior to that, majority floor leader, a lot of experience working with the body as a whole. Altogether, I've got 16 years of legislative service, first in the House and the Senate, service on over 15 different committees, 2 different runs on appropriations. That means separately. And that's probably the most heavy lift committee that we have, dealing with all the money in the state. 2 different runs on that. Currently serve as vice chairman of the board of directors for Lower Valley Energy. And we've come through some major projects, bringing gas pipelines in from the Jonah into our service area, doing a second one now, and bringing a second transmission line into our area. All of that takes a lot of work, a lot of experience, a lot of dealing with people in general. And ultimately, I've run a small business with my wife for 36 years. We've been married 40 years, 36 of those years running a Main Street business. And that brings a lot of experience. If you've had to run a business for over 3 decades in Wyoming, you've been through a lot. Everything from the recession of '08 to COVID, and we walked it all the way through all of those challenges and still show up every morning.
Thank you. Chuck, you're next.
Well, I'm a small business person too, and also have served in the state legislature for 6 years, serving portions of East Casper. I think one of the differentiating points in this campaign is that I'm not an insider. I'm not leadership in a committee. I'm not the Senate president. Instead, I'm a rank and file member. And I've really enjoyed being a rank and file member because bringing that outsider perspective. One of the things when I entered in the legislature in 2017, 5 years ago, was I thought we needed to get voter ID done. Over 80% of Americans support voter ID. It's across the board, a very popular election integrity proposal, which of course the Secretary of State oversees elections in our state, and worked on it for 3 years. And the insider stopped at 3 years in a row, but we kept working on it, had that fortitude. And in 2021, because of that grassroots support that we had built, we got it done in the state of Wyoming. And so I think bringing that outsider perspective, yet I'm in the state legislature, but having that outsider perspective focused on transparency, focusing on improving our election system is very important in this race. Thank you.
Thank you. Tara?
So I share with people who are interested about this race that if this was an actual job opening as opposed to a campaign to earn the people's trust for the position, my resume actually would demonstrate the knowledge, skill, and ability to serve as a Secretary of State. I am a practicing attorney and small business owner in Cheyenne for the last 12 years, but grew up in the heart of Wyoming, in Riverton, Wyoming. As a practicing business owner, and as a practicing attorney, I have practiced in corporate formations, which is a primary duty of the Secretary of State's office. I have worked with that office for the last 12 years, both in my professional life and then, of course, as my time as a state senator. In 2016, I was elected to the state Senate, where I have served on the Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions Committee, which is the home committee to the Secretary of State's office. So both in my professional life and then in my political legislative life, I interface with the Secretary of State's office daily. I have ran registered agents business. I have been a registered agent. I am a registered agent. I have corporations. I have formed corporations. I also have experience in the securities regulation aspect of the office, which is often overlooked but fundamentally important. The agency supervises all financial securities within the state and is an advocate against financial crime. Something that's very a passion of mine, and I care deeply about. I have been part of prosecution teams for security regulation issues, and think that that's incredibly important to our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Yes, I'm going to disagree with Tara a little bit here. I have 38 years of experience fighting the government and regulatory abuse. I've run a small business since 1992, but I'm the only person on this group that has actually managed more than 35 people. The Secretary of State's office is 35 people. I am extremely familiar with personnel rules. I know the ins and outs of promulgating rules. I've worked with one of the largest companies in the world. Some of my clients are some of the largest companies in the world. And yet, I am not a politician. And the founding fathers said, do your work and go home. And we need a change in government. If you don't know it's broken, you're not paying attention. When they rewrote the election law, they gave us voter ID. But absentee ballots is the problem. I filed 17 Freedom of Information Acts. The government is about as transparent as a brick wall. And today, I asked for an administrative hearing for a regress.
Thank you. The next question will come from Billy, and Chuck will be the first one to answer it.
Great. Thanks to you all for being here. Seeing as the Secretary of State's office, one of the main roles of the office is elections, we figured we'd dive right in and kind of taking a larger look. And we'll start with this. Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election was affirmed by the Congress. Multiple investigations, including a Republican-led inquiry in Arizona that confirmed his win, the Department of Justice, and the courts. Do you believe that Joe Biden is the legitimately elected president of the United States? And based on your answer there, how do you think voters can trust your judgment?
Well, I think that it's pretty clear what happened in the 2020 election, which is that it was a disaster. The 2000 Mules documentary, which we've been screening around the state, has talked about the problem with ballot drop boxes and the Zuck bucks that have been injected into elections, hundreds of millions of dollars that have been injected into elections to hire these mules. And it's way more than the margin of the election itself. And so I think the way that the media has tried to criticize anyone that wants to improve our elections, point out these problems, is really problematic. I asked one of the reporters at WyoFile, have you actually seen this documentary? Have you done any digging on these issues? And the answer is no. And so I think the way the media tries to set up a gotcha situation when we're saying, look, this is something we need to improve, way more than the margin of the election, it's clearly fraudulent. That's really problematic. And the way other candidates in this race have said that they're not for any improvements in our election process is problematic. We need to have election integrity. So I think it's very clear that the 2020 election had tremendous problems. I said that in the congressional race, saying it now. And I think the way the media just dismisses all of this is really problematic.
Thank you. Tara, it's your turn.
So, as has been evaluated to exhaustion over these last couple of years, there has been no objective evidence that has caused any court or the Department of Justice across this land to find there to be any persuasive evidence suggesting that there was fraud in the election, and therefore President Joe Biden was duly elected based on no objective evidence of any kind of persuasive fraud being presented to those courts to suggest otherwise. Any allegation that any review of election integrity issues, either in this state or in the other 50 states, is inappropriate is not true. We as a nation and as a state need to constantly be evaluating how our election process works. As with any process in any institution, there's always room for improvement and there's always a need for self-evaluation. But Wyoming does serve as an example to the nation as how to conduct elections. And there is no evidence or any concern about how we have conducted our elections here in the past. Is there conversation and room for us to evaluate how we could do things better? Absolutely. That goes for anything on any subject. And certainly that's the case in Wyoming, as it is all across the country. So again, I cannot speak to how many of the other states have conducted their elections. I'm not running to be their Secretary of State. I'm running to be the Secretary of State for the state of Wyoming. In that, I have confidence in our 23 county clerks who conduct our elections across this country. And I also believe in the rule of law.
Thank you. Mark, your turn.
Yes, find this interesting. I filed 17 FOIAs, found evidence that the absentee ballots in Albany County were opened without Republican representation. There were no Republican election judges present when the absentee ballots were opened. I have that in writing from the clerk. I filed criminal complaints that were ignored by the Secretary of State and the local district attorney. I then, and here we had two candidates, Terry Jones, Roxy Hensley. Roxy was up by 5,000 votes. Terry was up by 5,000 votes. The early absentee ballots were opened and processed without election judges present from the Republican Party, and Roxy lost by 100 votes, and Terry Jones lost by 40 votes. I have been trying to work on this. The Republican Party has been trying to work on this, but we could not get public documents. Very disturbing. I will see Chuck tomorrow night at 2000 Mules. I've seen it before. It's a very interesting documentary, and I think everyone, and I mean everyone, should watch it.
Thank you. And Dan?
Thank you. In answer to your question, the election stands. We are moving forward. I can't speak to the other states, but I can speak to Wyoming. And I've spent a lot of time in conversation with our clerks around the state and with the Secretary's office. A few little concerns have come up, but we'll get those corrected. We want to verify residency. We want to do a better job at that. We want to take care of those same day registrations, whether they're appropriate or perhaps the people who should not be registered to vote are slipping through. We got to double check that. And here's one that's really important. I think the Secretary of State's office has got this underway, the post-election audits. I think that's a safety catch net. And I would continue that as your Secretary of State. Those audits are crucial. I stand with my 23 county clerks without hesitation. We have a good system in Wyoming. We'll only make it better with time. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will come from Kyle, and Tara will be the first one to answer.
All right, we're going to stick with this elections topic since this is such an important responsibility of the position. Departing Secretary of State at Buchanan has staunchly defended the integrity of Wyoming's elections, as have the 23 county clerks across the state. And the Republican think tank, the Heritage Foundation, has only documented a handful, 3 cases of voter fraud in Wyoming since 2000. But all 4 of you have really placed election integrity at the center of your campaigns. So what specifically do you think needs to be fixed or improved with Wyoming's elections? And what measures would you advocate for in the state legislature?
So the reason why election integrity is at the forefront of all of our campaigns is because the public's perception having concern over election integrity in Wyoming. So I recognize that the people of Wyoming find this as a priority, that they want to ensure that they have confidence in their vote, that there is someone there to protect it. I am there to protect the people of Wyoming's vote and that they have confidence in how our election process works in the state of Wyoming. I support Secretary Buchanan's efforts, and I would continue those efforts to provide information and education all across the state. I believe his method of going into the communities and providing that explanation with his team has been very effective, and I think that needs to continue. So education and information is paramount. Certainly, there are concerns about ballot boxes. This has been identified. Historically, Wyoming has never used ballot boxes until 2020, and that changed as a result of the pandemic. The usage of that was minor and remains minor, and I think that you'll see the clerks declining from that, but providing more, I think, statutory guidance and stronger rules associated with how those are utilized is certainly an appropriate conversation and one we haven't had to have in the past. And providing more education about also those audits that do occur. So I think that would instill confidence in the voters, and so that they know that their vote is counted and their participation in this democracy is needed and a duty that we will protect and preserve.
Thank you. Mark?
Voting is very, very important. And the public perception needs to understand that we're working very hard to make sure that every qualified voter, that vote counts. I would like to see less absentees ballots processed, but again, we must have election judges present from the Republican Party when those are processed. It's very interesting to me that neither Jackie Gonzalez, the county clerk from Albany County, and I have a good relationship with the county clerks in this state, and Ed Buchanan are not running for election again. And those are the two that I was asking for information from. And those are the two that did not provide the information needed from a forensic audit that was conducted by the Republican Party. So there are issues. Please, let's not sweep them under the rug. And I believe that the founding fathers wanted part-time legislators.
Thank you. Dan, it's your turn.
Thank you. I think I mentioned a moment ago that some of the concerns, verifying residency, same-day registration, big emphasis on post-election audits. And I would do exactly as our Secretary of State does now. I'd be out in the communities, perhaps even more, because that's how I've run my legislative seat. I'm in everybody's, I have a 3-county area. I'm in everybody's meeting all the time in person, and that's the way I'd run it across the state. I'd be out there explaining what we're doing with the election process as Secretary of State, and then following up if needed in any particular concerns or areas. It's working with the people, right with them in the same room, same face-to-face conversations that gets it done. And that's what I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Chuck?
Well, we've been doing town halls and meeting Wyomingites across our state. And I hear again and again tremendous concerns and feelings that there's areas of improvement for our elections. And that's why we've put forward an election integrity agenda, a detailed process for us to increase confidence in our elections. For one, we need to ban the ballot drop boxes. We need to have paper ballots. It's very disturbing that some counties have moved off paper ballots. We need to have a hand audit. We need to ban the Zuck bucks, the third parties that are injecting hundreds of millions of dollars into our elections. And we need to protect our voter ID law, which was a huge part of that. It was about increasing confidence in our elections. And over 80% of Americans want voter ID. And unfortunately, it's under attack. There's currently a lawsuit pending where they're trying to get it invalidated, to get an injunction for the August primary. So we need a Secretary of State with that vigor, that energy to think about how we improve the system, and sort of this talk out of both sides of the mouth notion that, well, some of the legislative opponents in this race have said, well, there isn't issues, and then saying, well, we're going to look at some stuff, but there's really no detail on what is actually going to be done to advance a real agenda. And ultimately, this office, that's what it needs. It needs someone with vigor, with energy, and focused on getting reforms that are going to help our state through the legislature and through that office. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
I think I just answered, didn't I? Yeah, we're good.
Oh,
Susan, yeah, I had an answer in there.
you answered Billy's question?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then Chuck?
Are you confirming that?
I think everyone has answered this one, yes?
Oh, okay. Oh, so Billy's gonna ask a question.
Okay, on to Billy.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, everybody. Hearing the conversation, I think some of you have brought up issues that you've seen with the 2020 election in Wyoming, but I just wanted to put a specific point on the question, and what specific evidence for those of you that have seen or are pointing to issues with the 2020 election. What specific evidence can you cite that supports the claim that there were issues or fraud in Wyoming during the 2020 election? And for those of you that don't think that there were any problems, what makes you confident the election was secure, and how would you speak to voters to convince them of that?
Thank you. And Mark, you'll be the first one to answer this question.
I will point to the response to FOIA number 2 at 2HIII. If you would like a copy of that, I will email it to you, where the county clerk, Jackie Gonzalez, responded that election judges were not present when absentee ballots were opened and processed. And when the absentee ballot scans were added to the vote, Terry Jones was up by 5,000 votes and lost by 40. And then we asked for metrics, i.e., and they're required to be held for 2 years, and we were not allowed to have them. So there's your example. I am the only one who has undertaken this hard work, and I understand how to make election integrity work. And I'll push on the legislature, and I'll make sure my county clerks have the resources they need to make sure their job is done properly. And I'm going to say 23 of the 24, 22 of the 23, I'm sorry, were properly done.
Thank you. Now, Dan, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you. I'm not saying there was fraud. In fact, as I double check with our clerks all around the state, they're confident in the system. A few little tweaks along the way, we can do that. We need to have a good working relationship with the legislature to do that. Whoever steps into this office needs to walk into a place like the Senate and say, I can work with you to get these bills passed. And I think overall, I'm starting to feel and hear back from some of our clerks. They are frustrated with some of the misinformation that's being pitched out there about the elections. They spend a lot of time and a lot of work on making sure these elections go right. And they are starting to grow a little frustrated with the misinformation that's being put out there. And I'll stand with my clerks, and we'll make sure the elections are safe and secure, and we'll move forward.
Thank you. Chuck?
Well, I think it is clear, from the 2020 election, I was getting calls that day. Why isn't there voter ID in Wyoming? Why isn't there voter ID in Wyoming? And talked with those individuals about our efforts to pass voter ID. And we got that done the next year in the 2021 session. Same thing with the ballot drop boxes. There's clearly a lack of security with those as opposed to the gold standard in elections. So we need to ban the ballot drop boxes. And I listen. When I go out there, I do town halls, I do forums, and I hear these concerns like I have with voter ID, that we need to have a voter ID law. I got on that and we got that done. Same thing with the ballot drop boxes. So we need to have someone with energy and vigor in this office. And I voted against the bill to raise the salary on this office. It was raised to $125,000 a year, and there are legislative members on this panel that voted for it. But I really think the idea that someone is going to be collecting that kind of paycheck and not trying to improve the system, there's always areas and room for improvement in a system like this, and that's clear in our election system. So that's not misinformation, as the two other legislative opponents have tried to allege. That's just trying to improve and get better, which is what good public service is about, and listening to the people of Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tara?
Yes, so there is no evidence of any fraud in the 2020 Wyoming election. And I have always stood by the 23 county clerks for the last 6 years on the Corporations Committee. I have worked with them closely and trust in the work and their commitment. I mean, they are duly elected county clerks seeking the position of running elections within their counties. We can be so proud of the work that they do. And I know that they are so passionate about election integrity and ensuring that people's votes are counted and that people vote lawfully and that those votes are secure. I have known that for as long as I have worked with them so closely and carried all of that work forward on their behalf. How would I ensure that trust? I think it's important for, again, education, that education campaign to continue. I'd also encourage the people who have those concerns, instead of saying, this happened, that happened, and they, to bring it in as a we. So volunteer to be a poll worker, to be an election judge, and be a part of the process in Wyoming, because you can. And your county clerks would welcome you in tomorrow in Laramie County at 10 a.m. You can go down to the courthouse and you can see how the election equipment operates. There's a public showing so everyone can see with full transparency and trust, and be able to ask questions of those elected officials and just see how our elections are run in the state of Wyoming. So again, I have always had their backs, and I will continue to have the backs of our county clerks, and will continue to work for the best elections in Wyoming.
Thank you. The next question will come from Kyle, and Dan will answer first.
Okay, great. So we're hearing a lot of talk about those county clerks, and that's where we're going to go next. This is an office which, as several of you have mentioned, regularly works closely with those county clerks across the state, and also as well as many unelected officials in the Secretary of State's office. So we want to know, what is your working relationship like with those clerks, and how would you bring together the diverse group of stakeholders you have to work with, especially as we're in a climate of a lot of intimidation and fear among election workers across the country?
Thank you. Before I answer that, I'd like to note something. We've had the voter ID bill brought up 3 times now, and I'd like to compliment my colleague, Representative Evan Simpson, who has actually been into Jackson several times presenting to the school board there, for crafting most of that piece of legislation that was heard. He did an excellent job, and I thank him for that. As far as working relationships, that's what I do. My entire life is working relationships. I've already been out talking to the county clerks and visiting with them and saying, are there any specific concerns? What should we address? Is there anything we have to have ready? Do we need to take that education process forward? I compliment Senator Nethercott for noting that there's an opportunity now to go down and see how the voting process is done. I'd take that into every county and publicize that and say, come on down and see how we do the voting process in Wyoming. Do you have any concerns? Here's your opportunity. See how it's done and get your questions answered. Wyoming is a great state, has a great process. I stand with the people who put that election together every 2 years and make it happen successfully.
Thank you. Chuck, did I see you want to use your red card?
I'd like to answer and then use my red card at the conclusion of the round.
At the conclusion of the round, as opposed to the conclusion of, okay.
Yep.
Will do. You're next.
Okay, so I'll answer the question first, and then I would like to use the red card at the end. I have a great working relationship with the county clerks on voter ID. Worked with them for 4 years on that, across 3 times when it failed, and then the 4th when it passed. And at first, the county clerks opposed voter ID, and it was for a variety of reasons. And eventually, and this is why we need someone with vigor and energy in this office, not someone who's just saying, well, we're going to do whatever the county clerks say. Well, they were opposed to voter ID, but worked with them and ultimately got a bill crafted that they supported. And it took a long time, but we kept up that dialogue. When I filed for office, I've continued that dialogue with them on some of these reforms that we've been talking about to improve our election system. And I feel we can get there. We can do it together. But at the same time, this idea that we're just going to say that everything is okay, and that's about having their backs. I don't think that's an appropriate for an elected official. Just because somebody says something doesn't mean that there isn't areas for improvement. And I think that doesn't mean that it's an adversarial relationship. It's what we want. It's a relationship that has that desire to hash out some of the differences and ultimately come to a conclusion that is going to yield a good result. So I go to that voter ID law, worked with them for across multiple years on that. We ultimately, they supported the bill and have a good working relationship with them. Don't agree on everything, but we can get there by working together. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have two more people to answer the question, and then you want to use your red card. Is that right? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So Tara, you are next.
Well, as previously indicated, I have served on the elections committee for the last 6 years in the legislature, and throughout that process have been honored to meet almost all 23 county clerks and work with their association over the years, understanding their concerns and just how hard they work for the people of Wyoming. Again, I have been probably one of the most receptive members of that committee to their concerns, recognizing that they always approach the legislature with a solution in hand. They just don't come to us with the problem, but actually have a solution underway. One of those most recently had to do with the new need to be able to count absentee ballots early. And they sought statutory authority through the Secretary of State's office and the legislature in order to do that because of voter changes, right? More Wyoming voters have chosen to vote absentee, and their ability to count those ballots accurately and safely was being challenged due to that high volume. A huge change for Wyoming, right, to do that early voting. And I carry that legislation on their behalf with great criticism from many of my colleagues, including both legislative colleagues here who voted against the clerks. That was fully supported by all 23 of them and something that they desperately needed. But having the courage to make change and to support their efforts and the solutions that they're seeking that was thoughtfully and safely and securely made. I'm very proud of that effort and would continue as their Secretary of State.
Thank you. Mark?
Yes, I email the clerks quite often, all 23 of them. I was also very disappointed in Ed Buchanan when he stepped on Julie Freeze's territory and in the Loomis run for Senate, because that is not the place of the Secretary of State. The county should be controlled by the clerk, and she should be able to bring complaints to the DA if violations by the party are being done. So I work with people, I build coalitions all the time. That's what I do for a living. And I am, very adamant that only qualified voters should vote, and those votes should be counted fairly. I believe that our county clerks are honest and good people, and they need to be respected in their position. And yet, the county clerk in Albany County isn't running, and neither is Ed Buchanan. And I filed 17 Freedom of Information Acts and 2 criminal complaints. And those Freedom of Information Acts were not taken seriously, and neither were the criminal complaints.
Thank you. Now, I believe, Chuck, you want to use your red card?
Thank you. I want to respond to that point earlier made on the voter ID bill that it was drafted by another legislator. And that's a claim that sort of Mr. Dockstetter and Ms. Nethercott have been making. It's been interesting. It's been alternating each forum. A different legislator has been making that claim that is running for this office, and it's totally false. I work with other legislators on these bills because it's a team effort. And so I called Evan Simpson, and he had a few suggestions on the bill, and we used a few of them in the bill. And most of them ultimately did come out of the bill for a variety of reasons, but that's about the team effort. But ultimately, the lead sponsor of the bill is pretty clear. It's on the bill jacket. It was HB 75 in the 2021 session. And it's interesting because the Senate pushback on voter ID it was huge. The Corporations Committee voted totally against it. Every single member on there, and Ms. Nethercott is a member of the Corporations Committee, voted against voter ID in I believe it was a 2019 interim. So the Senate had tremendous pushback on voter ID, but we got there through that team effort. And the idea that, well, we shouldn't be calling other legislators and getting feedback is, I think, problematic, and part of the problem from this insider class that we don't want in the Secretary of State's office. We want someone who's going to have that energy and to take something on, and that voter ID, I think, is a tremendous case study of that. So I wanted to clarify that, because there's been a lot of inaccurate statements from two other candidates in this race on that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will come from Billy, and it goes to Chuck.
Sorry, it just took me a minute to unmute my mic there. But Senator Nethercott just brought up a bill that would have allowed, that allowed clerks to begin processing absentee ballots early on the Thursday and Friday before the election day. And Representative Gray, Senator Dockstader, and Mr. Armstrong, I wanted to follow up with all of you, and Senator Nethercott, you as well, just to get your position on that bill, and specifically for Representative Gray, Senator Dockstader, why you voted against it, and Mr. Armstrong, my understanding is that you did not support that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but just wanted to get everybody's position on that bill specifically.
I'm first, correct? Thank you. Yes, I opposed that bill and spoke against it on the floor numerous times. I think it's problematic to be opening ballots ahead of the election and to just have them floating there, I think, is really problematic. And it's very unfortunate it passed on introduction in the House. It was introduced by one vote. It was really unfortunate. And I think this is an example of why we need an election integrity candidate in the Secretary of State's office, because this is going to decrease confidence in our elections. It already has. I've done forums around the state where people have raised these concerns. And I think the system in that respect we were right on there, which is that we were not going to open those ballots until election day and not just have them floating around in a room. So I think that's really a problematic bill, and I did oppose it and spoke against it on the floor of the state legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Tara, it's your turn.
Well, thank you. Well, I obviously supported that bill and carried it through the Senate. And I would like to respond to Mr. Gray's allegation that ballots are floating in rooms in the clerk's offices. They are secure, they are under seal, and they are under watch. Those clerks are not allowing for any ballot to be floating around in the courthouses. That is a false allegation and actually serves to undermine the integrity of our elections. And it's important to recognize that and how that rhetoric has damaging effects for the voter confidence and election integrity in our state. It is unacceptable and an inaccurate statement. So I supported our clerks who come forward with a solution that had really thoughtful safeguards associated with how to process those ballots. We know that over 100,000 people vote each year. And as absentee ballots increase, that can be up to 65,000 ballots to be voted or to be counted on election day. Wyoming really enjoys getting those election results on election night. And there's just no ability for those clerks to process that many absentee ballots in that method. And so they said, listen, we need a better strategy. We need a better solution for our constituents, because again, they're duly elected and they respond to the voters as well at the local level. And they said, this is the solution we've come forward. And so here are the safeguards we've put in place to ensure everyone has voter confidence. You can come watch the process. There is full transparency associated with how that goes to make sure there's no ballots floating around. Very proud of the work that they did.
Thank you. Mark, it's your turn.
Absolutely opposed to this. The problem I see is we now have to supply election judges for 6 days before the election. So when that's not a full-time job. It's somebody coming forth and volunteering their time. And now you've made it harder on them to not just the Republican Party, the Democrats, everybody, because now election judges have to be present when all those absentee ballots are opened and processed. And now, what's interesting about this bill is one of the complaints in my criminal complaint was that ballots were opened 6 days before the election day, without election judges from the Republican Party present. Again, that is response to FOIA to Act 2. And I am very disappointed that some people say there was no fraud here. They have blinders over their eyes. They haven't seen any of my complaints. They haven't looked at the FOIA data. I filed with the Office of Administrative Hearing today to exhaust administrative relief on this issue.
Thank you. And Dan, it's your turn.
Just simply the concept that we're opening something up before election day. Didn't have a lot of concern one way or another. Checked with my clerk, didn't feel the concern, and that's it.
Thank you. The next question will come from Kyle, and Tara will be the first one to answer it.
All right, we are going to switch gears a little bit, moving on to some of the other responsibilities of the Secretary of State. A recent complaint filed with the Federal Election Commission alleged that a brand new LLC violated the straw donor rule by making a $50,000 contribution to a pro-Harriet Hageman super PAC within weeks of its incorporation. And part of your role as Secretary of State would be to oversee campaign finance, which is an area that many Americans across the political spectrum would like to see some reform in. So what is your stance on regulating so-called dark money in political campaigns?
You're correct. I think dark money is a major concern for most Americans and certainly Wyomingites to understand how these campaigns are being funded and where the messaging is coming from, really who is doing this. It is fundamental and important to me as your next Secretary of State to continue to evaluate this concern, have serious conversations with our lawmakers and with the people of Wyoming to understand what is an appropriate balance between the First Amendment rights and manipulative dark money that has a negative outcome on the freedom of our democracy. So I think it's important. I think it's a primary role of the Secretary of State's office as it is statutorily and needs to be on the forefront of those concerns. Obviously, there is pending litigation with the Secretary of State's office on these issues and laws that went through the Corporations Committee again, and that I defended and pushed out on the Senate floor to strengthen those laws and to provide additional clarities associated with penalties for violating those campaign finance laws. We enhanced that to $500 a day as opposed to a one-time fine of $500. And I support that enhanced penalty. And got that through the finish line, both as a committee member and leading the way on presenting that bill on the floor. Really important and recognize the continuing conversation that we as Americans need to have as we balance those First Amendment rights with these very legitimate election concerns.
Thank you. Mark?
Citizens United is horrid law. It's horrible. Secretary of State's office needs to investigate fully any allegation of finance malfeasance. I actually authored and put forward a resolution because you can't, the contribution side in Citizens United is difficult to move around. But I see that we could push for campaign limits on spending. It's done in other jurisdictions, and my resolution asked for a limit on spending of $2 per potential vote. top to bottom, all the way from city council races to governor's races. And what that would do is limit the megaphone that the campaign has. So I would push for limits on spending at $2 per potential vote. And I think that would fix many issues in our country where the people no longer are represented, the donors are represented.
Thank you. Dan, it's your turn.
Compliment the corporations committee for stepping out and bringing that forward. And ultimately, myself and several others agreed that we needed the transparency in there. And I think you're not done hearing this. There was concerns that perhaps people could still be involved in a contribution program where it was not completely transparent as to who was making that donation. And I would stay right there with actually ramping that up a little stronger in the future. But good start by the corporations committee in the Senate.
Thank you. And Chuck?
Well, we certainly want transparency, and we also want to protect the First Amendment. It has been interesting to me that the media always cherry picks these cases. It always seems like the conservative cases come to the forefront, but then the cases from more insider groups pushing insider candidates never make it into the paper, and those have been huge over the years, and we need investigations to look into this and to get to the bottom of it. I also earlier want to respond to an inaccurate statement, because it's very important we're accurate on our statements earlier on the issue of the ballots being opened early for counting. Ms. Nethercott said that they're under seal with that new bill that she supported. No, they are being opened, and they are opened ahead of time. It doesn't make sense that they could be counted if they're not opened. And so as the later two questioners said, they are opened, and that was an inaccurate statement earlier. So I think it's very important we have clarity on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Billy has the next question, and Mark will be first.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah, pivoting again, the Secretary of State sits with the four other top elected officials in the state on two boards, the State Board of Land Commissioners and the State Loan and Investments Board, and the SBLC and the SLIB, as people refer to them. And the Board of Land Commissioners recently voted to approve glamping and storage operations on a parcel of state trust land, which is land that the state is obligated to use to maximize revenue for Wyoming schools. They voted to approve glamping and storage operations on a parcel of state trust land in Teton Village, despite objections from Teton County residents and local officials. Teton County is now suing the board over its decision. But there are two other large parcels of land in Teton County that are also state trust lands, one by Kelly, one by Munger. And there's been talk about developing or somehow otherwise maximizing the revenue out of those lands as well. And the question that I have is, what sort of development, if you were elected as Secretary of State and we're sitting on the State Board of Land Commissioners, what sort of development is appropriate on the state trust lands in Teton County, considering the two as yet undeveloped parcels are surrounded by national forests and parks?
I have quite a bit of experience with state lands and investments. There's 11 million acres in the United States that are landlocked. 6 million of that are in Wyoming. I did a bid for cleanup on Tin Can Alley. It was quite a mess, state land. My bid was $640,000. The winning bid was out of Arvada, Colorado for $2.5 million. The SLIB board basically wasted $2 million of state money. They did not do the typical federal three bid, low qualified bid rule. Your question about what is appropriate development on state land is interesting, and it should be what the community wants, not what profits somebody behind the scenes. And if you don't know that there is unethical conduct in government, you're not paying attention. So I think that the idea that the community can't have an input on what is in their local community is wrong.
Thank you. Dan, your turn.
Thank you. I traveled to Cheyenne specifically for that meeting you noted, stood with Teton County and testified that we shouldn't move that land into the commercial project that it had there. They still move forward with it, and I understand that there are 2 more projects coming up, and I'll probably make special trips to Cheyenne just specifically for that, to stand with Teton County as well. There's very limited land in Teton County. We have to be very, very careful how we use it. Perhaps Munger Mountain, we're still looking for some situations where we need to house teachers. We need to fully explore that, because otherwise we won't keep our teachers in Jackson, because they can no longer afford to live there based on what they're paid. It's a changing environment on the west side of the state, and I don't see it going back anytime soon.
Thank you. Chuck, it's your turn.
Well, I believe in a Wyoming first policy on the SLIB board with state lands. I've been very disturbed by the lack of transparency in many cases. There was one case in Converse County where a state lease was put up, and a Wyoming family that has been on land for a long time was put at a disadvantage in that lease as opposed to a big corporation. And I think that sort of thing we have to stop. And I have a record of that. When they were looking at, when the SLIB board was looking at this huge land purchase, 1/6 of Wyoming, this huge swath of Southwest Wyoming, I asked for a number of public records, including the consulting agreement that they had where there were conflicts involved. It was a 6-figure agreement that was not reported on by the press because there was no transparency on it. And I put that forward. I did a statement on it, and I put that forward. So we need transparency. We need to listen. And I have a record of that as a state legislator, calling the SLIB board to account and asking for transparency. One of my first motions on the SLIB board is that we need to have an audio record of every single SLIB board meeting, not just a live stream, but a video record as well. And we need full transparency on the SLIB board. So I want to review the dossiers on these different cases, but I have a record in the state legislature of going against the big corporate interests that often come before the SLIB board and receive these enormous advantages.
Thank you. And Tara, it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, certainly Teton County has a very special place in my heart. My family having homesteaded there so long ago in the 1880s, and know just how special Teton County is. I would not have voted with the other SLIB board members as it relates to the usage of the glamping parcels, and probably hesitated, to really utilize much of those lands in Teton County, recognizing that there is this immediate desire to get a return on investment, which is one of our fiduciary duties as members of the State Land Investment Board, to maximize those state lands for our schools and for the generations to come. But I know that we have to protect and preserve much of our lands, particularly in Teton County, recognizing that those are unique and different than other lands. So certainly, a balancing of interests is required when it comes to making those decisions. Each area of the state that possesses some of those lands has different and unique interests, from hunters and outdoorsmen to livestock to grazers, right, to public lands access. And all of those balance must be considered, and a balance needs to be struck between those competing interests and maximizing those state lands for value for generations to come. But I do think a cautionary approach is important, particularly in Teton County, even though it has always struggled with providing affordable and accessible housing. It's certainly a priority for that community.
Thank you. The next question will come from Kyle, and Dan will answer first.
All right, great. We are going to move on now to the business world. So in addition to elections, state land use, this office oversees business affairs in Wyoming. And the Cowboy State was recently described in a Washington Post investigation as one of the world's top tax havens. And some claim that a lack of oversight over shell companies and LLCs has led to a climate that facilitates fraud and financial crime and corruption. So how will you improve the state's monitoring efforts of the business community, particularly for large out-of-state and sometimes out-of-country corporations?
Sure, what you're talking about, the cowboy cocktail, and perhaps lawmakers didn't consider every possible source of money that would be in there. We'd go back in and we'd start to rework that. I don't think it's a real quick fix, but it's a possible fix. And we would step in and start the process for correcting that. Part of that would be the continuing the work of moving the entire office into the digital age so that we know exactly where we're at all times. There would be no exchange of papers and old-fashioned stamps and all of that. We would make sure that all the documentation that we need is digital. I think it's time to go back and revisit that. That won't be a quick fix. I've read that entire document that you just referenced and ready to go back to work on that. Plus, start the process of moving the office into the digital age.
Thank you. Chuck, you're next.
Well, Wyoming was on the cutting edge, had the first statute creating LLCs in the country. And the LLC is now the main organization mechanism used for small business around the world. And as a small business person myself, we need to make it easy and affordable for ma and pa small businesses that someone is doing on the side or as a second sort of money-making venture, that it's as easy as possible. And I think it's very problematic. And it's one of the areas where I've set myself apart from the other two legislators in this race. They've sort of trumpeted this $30 million that is put into a slush fund for the legislature from these LLC filing fees. And I think those filings should be done at cost. Those should not be burdens. Those extra burdens should not be placed on small businesses that are making those filings. And I've heard a lot of concerns about the cowboy cocktail. I've been brainstorming with a number of individuals on how we can do some back of the house audits to make sure that our LLC laws are not being taken advantage of by oligarchs overseas, because that is certainly not what we want. And I've heard that across the board, doing town halls, forums, and events here across Wyoming. So I think we do need to look at that. We actually had a hearing in one of the committees I serve on, beginning to look at that in the state legislature a few weeks ago.
Thank you. Tara, it's your turn.
So this issue is not a new one to the state of Wyoming. Wyoming has always prided itself on being business friendly and less government overreach. And that results in these types of consequences. So what is attracting bad actors potentially, or is as the allegation presents? We don't actually have evidence of that, which is notable. But there is an allegation that as a result of Wyoming's lack of requirements associated with who the people or entities or oligarchs may be behind those corporate shells or corporate entities, we just don't have the detail in our law or the requirement for that to be known. The only way to resolve that is through the legislature, through lawmakers. As a Secretary of State, we do not do that. That would be a legislative decision that requires the legislature to evaluate whether or not Wyoming wants to maintain that reputation as being so business friendly, or if they are going to require all of the members of a certain organization, an LLC, a corporation, a professional corporation, a statutory trust, all of the different types of corporate entities we have in the state, well beyond the LLC, and how much information we're going to require people to provide. That will result in us losing that favored status for being a placemaker in the globe, for being business friendly and a corporate entity creator. So a lot of conversation needs to take place on that front.
Thank you. Mark, it's your turn.
Yeah, I remember when the cowboy cocktail was being discussed. My grandfather, Jack Corbett, had a discussion with Al Simpson. My grandfather was against it. He thought it would bring in fraud, and it seems that it has. What's interesting here is while the legislature has a $36 million slush fund, they raise business fees on coffee kiosks. So if you sold 50 cups of coffee to pay your business license fee, now you got to sell 100. I want to have our business environment so small and ethical that they would not and could not pick winners. The fact that we don't know who those corporations are and what kind of businesses they're in is very concerning. The legislature should have known about this for a long time. I'm the only one that didn't have any control over that. I would have fixed it a long time ago. And I want businesses here in Wyoming that put jobs on the ground for the people of Wyoming.
Great. You guys are doing such a great job. We're zipping right along. We're ready for our 10th question, which Billy will ask and Chuck will answer first.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I want to return back to the State Board of Land Commissioners issue and just put a finer point on the question I asked. One of the debates around here has been, or tension between local officials and the Office of State Lands and Investments, is whether or not development on state trust lands should be required to adhere to local zoning. And I just wanted to ask you directly for each of these candidates, should development on state trust lands be required to adhere to local zoning statewide?
That certainly sounds like a reasonable proposal. I would say on the SLIB board, my experience has been that the SLIB board is very untransparent. So I'm glad that individuals are really coming to these meetings and testifying. And as a member of the legislature, I've really taken testimony. I mean, it's a key part of the committee meetings. And you can contact me anytime. My number is 251-1372, 251-1372. But on the question, I think that is a reasonable proposal, as long as the zoning is reasonable that is put forward. I mean, that's a key as well. But I think that certainly sounds like a reasonable proposal. I would want to dig on what exactly the county commissioners have in mind for those zoning regulations. But I think that sounds reasonable and is in line with local control.
Thank you. Tara, it's your turn.
So it is reasonable for the state lands to follow local zoning, right? I mean, those state lands are located within a community that has just determined standards for itself, zoning standards. So generally the answer is yes, that state land should be required to adhere to those local regulations in order to preserve what that community has determined to be important to those community members. So the answer is yes. However, there may be some exceptions to that. So it's not a black or white answer. It cannot be. As you can imagine, there may be other areas in the state that may have restrictions that would not allow for the use of lands that actually belong to the state to be utilized in a way that benefits our schools and the generations to come, and that would not be an appropriate result. So it does, again, require working with the local communities. It does require a balancing of interests, but generally the answer should be yes. The state lands should be utilized only in a way that comports with those local regulations as determined by that community.
Thank you. Mark, you'll go next.
Thank you. As a guy that's done planning and environmental impact statements for quite a while, do a lot of toxic cleanup there. The answer is yes, absolutely yes. The zoning should have taken into account any minerals or other use before they were promulgated. They had public comment. The state, as with a large developer, should not be able to come and step on the wills and wishes of a community. Those zoning requirements are law, and they're a part of law. And they should be adhered to, no matter if you're a mom and pop, single family, or a large corporation or government entity. The law is the law. The law should not be for thee and not for me. And with that being said, we shouldn't also have backroom deals or what is, let's get a little slide room on this rule so that if I need my development, I can get it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dan, your turn.
The answer is yes. That's why I traveled 7 hours over to support Teton County with this first one. And that's why I'll travel over to Cheyenne for the next 2 hearings regarding the next 2 parcels to support the local county and their desires. That's where I stand.
Thank you. We've had a lot of questions tonight, and we could be here all night long because these people are also interesting, but it's time for wrap up. And so we'll have each one of the candidates have up to a minute and a half to summarize and make their closing statements. And Tara will be first. Oh, Mark, did you want to use your red card before we do wrap up?
No, I'd like to use it as additional time in my wrap up. I
Okay,
was told that was all. Okay,
fine.
thank you.
So Tara will go first.
And I'll use my red card as well. So that means how much time do we get for closing?
So you'll have a minute and a half to answer for your wrap up, and a minute and a half for your red card. Up to.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for your time and attention this evening. This has been a wonderful forum to host, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions and all of the viewers that are watching throughout the state and certainly throughout Teton County who have an interest in this particular forum. Participating in our election process and learning about the candidates is just such an important part of our democracy here in Wyoming and the United States, and so proud to be a part of it. Again, I am Tara Nethercott, and I am running to be your next Republican Secretary of State. As a 5th-generation Wyomingite, my Wyoming roots run deep. I was born here, raised here, and chose to build my life here. I want to be the next Secretary of State. It is a job that I would apply for if I could, but have to run for office. I have a deep passion for elections, and I have a deep passion, obviously, for the corporate side of the office as well, as a result of the career path that I have chosen. It's certainly unfortunate that the primary concern of this election cycle has to be election integrity, but it is. Our elections in this country have been challenged, and I am committed to fight and protect your vote and to protect Wyoming's leader in the nation for how to conduct elections and our election process here in this state. I'm also committed to evaluating constantly best practices for improvements to ensure that voters have the trust and confidence in me and in how we conduct elections across our state. I have the relationships with the county clerks and the desire to continue to work with them to make sure that Wyoming voters have confidence and that their vote is heard and counted, and we have meaningful elections in the state of Wyoming. I'm also committed to Wyoming remaining a global leader when it comes to corporate formations across the world and ensuring we remain open and ready for business in order to fight inflation and to keep Wyomingites' tax burdens low. That revenue generation for the state is fundamentally important, and it does not go into a slush fund. It goes into a general fund for services of our state to operate. And we are very fortunate to do so in a very important role that the Secretary of State's office plays in order to ensure Wyoming businesses are thriving in our state. Those fees are low and competitive, and I'm committed to keeping them there so that we remain that place. I'm also committed to fighting financial crime and securities regulation. That is a fundamental part of that office as well. My role on the State Lands Board would be one of balance of all interests across our state. Certainly, when one is a member of the SLIB board, one represents all of the state and a duty to all of the generations and our school children to maximize those profits for our state lands while balancing those interests. One does not represent a certain area or corner of the state, but the entire state. A fiduciary duty to serve as in trust for the generations to come, as how our millions of state lands are to be utilized and protected for public access, for wealth, and for businesses. Thank you. Vote for Tara.
Thank you. Mark, you're next. So you have a minute and a half for your wrap up and up to a minute and a half for your red card. So up to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Armstrong, and I'm here as a job application. The other 3 are here as a performance review. What have they done? How have they done it? Are you satisfied with your government? Are you satisfied with what goes on in Cheyenne? I am not. I think that there is the people of the state of Wyoming deserve better. I believe that the people of the state of Wyoming are the most free-hearted, free-souled people in the world. And yet, the Cato Institute rates us 23rd freest state in the nation. We also have more government employees per capita than any other state in the nation. That is why we're not free. I believe in freedom. Yes, freedom for the people. When we pledge allegiance to the flag, we say justice for all. Justice isn't for all. It's for those who can afford the best lawyer. Let's get freedom back. Let's get our government back under control. I believe that government overreach and people who don't pay attention to criminal complaints and FOIAs that discover criminal acts and then run for an office should reconsider their positions. I want election integrity. I think that day of election in person reduces fraud. When the legislatures and the legislators rewrote the election law, it still says any qualified voter can obtain an absentee ballot. I'd like a reason for that. I would like you to have a reason to vote absentee. You're in the military, you have a job that's going to take you out of the area. I would like, because there's fraud there. So please, I implore you to take a good, close, hard look at all the candidates for Secretary of State. I believe I'm head and shoulders above the rest. My work ethic will astound you. So my name is Mark Armstrong. I'm running for Secretary of State. my email address is mr_geoman@yahoo. I can provide any document on election integrity you'd like.
Thank you. Dan, you're next. A minute and a half with your wrap up.
Thank you. It's important to combine common sense values with just simply getting the work done for the people. Over the years, 16 years, I've made countless trips to Cheyenne for my district, working on everything from developing infrastructure for our communities, to saving jobs in the mineral-based economy of southwestern Wyoming. I can transfer all of that to new issues now in the Secretary of State's office and take the big picture look for the entire state. Asking, will the work of the Secretary of State's office and SLIB, will it create those jobs? Now, on all these repetitive trips, one thing that I did was meet face-to-face with all the parties involved to find solutions. Sometimes I would go to state agencies prior to even going to a SLIB meeting and making sure that we had a solution in place, working face-to-face in person. I would do the same as your Secretary of State. Would not be limited to work in Cheyenne, but I'd be out there working directly with all 23 county clerks, meeting with the people on everything from matters related to the business division to making sure that we're transferring the Secretary of State's office into a digital-based service, one-stop service, which is now underway. Finish that, and then making sure our elections are secure. I'm Dan Dockstetter, great-great-grandson of Wyoming Kimmer coal miners, and I ask for your vote for Wyoming Secretary of State.
Thank you. And Chuck, you have a minute and a half for your wrap up.
Thank you. I'm Chuck Gray, running for Secretary of State. Want to thank all who put on this forum. It was an engaging night. I've always believed that we should have a vigorous debate on issues. That's what makes our republic great, is having that vigorous debate. I have a track record, and the only candidate who has a track record of being an outsider and getting things across the finish line that increase voter confidence in our election, that voter ID bill. I'm also a small business person, and the only candidate in this race that has legislative experience that has talked about the need for us to make it easier for small businesses to form and less expensive by getting rid of these lowering these fees and taxes that are being used for slush funds for the legislature, rather than just having a fee that pays the costs of what the service is, which is what it should be. So we need to get that under control so we have small business growth in our state. And I'm the only one who has a history of getting transparency in the SLIB board. When they tried to do that enormous land purchase, I was the one that brought forward that there was a consulting agreement, six-figure consulting agreement, with a New York City establishment that had a conflict on that sale that was not reported by the media, had those documents and put that forward. Also on some SLIB cases that have been problematic, where corporate interests have been put over Wyoming interests, that brought those to the forefront, that led to an investigation in the Ag Committee that is being done in the legislature. So I'm Chuck Ray. I'm a grassroots conservative who has that track record. Please contact me anytime at 251-1372, 251-1372, and look forward to talking with you.
Thank you for everyone for joining us tonight to meet these wonderful Republican candidates for Wyoming Secretary of State. Thank you to each of the candidates for your thoughtful comments. You provided us with important information so that we can become more informed. We're much obliged to the media panel for their insightful questions and to the entire forum team, the League of Women Voters, Teton County Library, Jackson Hole News and Guide, KHOL, Jackson Hole Community Radio, Buckrail, and WyoFile. And finally, thank you to you, our audience, for striving to become better informed voters. You make a difference. So remember to vote in the primary and general elections. And as an added bonus, these forum sessions are recorded and posted to a YouTube link via the library's website. And if you're interested in nonpartisan politics and improving voter awareness, come join us at the League of Women Voters. You don't have to be a woman to join. All of you stay safe, positive, and healthy. Good night. Take care.